Boom, it's final. Penn State 31, Boise State 14. It's the lowest scoring output for Boise State all year. A lot of talk going into this. I had a lot of things to say during the game, but we got to keep our mouth shut as much as we can. But now the game's over. And I got to tell you, I picked Penn State to win this game. I picked them to cover. I rage viewed this whole game. It was the weirdest feeling because Penn State's in control most of the game. There was never one moment where I feared that Boise was going to win this outright. But yet I'm watching and I'm just like many of you probably were, just like grinding my teeth at thinking this should be out of reach, and it's not because there is the most obvious concept imaginable in front of you. And if you're Andy Koldenicki and you're this Penn State offensive staff, you are looking everywhere but right in front of you. And right in front of you was Katron Allen averaging what, like 8.5 yards per carry, and it was there all night. And Penn State several times, I tweeted during the game, almost exhibiting a dereliction of duty in their offensive play calling. People who know me, you guys who watch the show a lot, you know one of the things I never do is question play calling because I am smart enough to know what I don't know. And I think that there's a lot of hindsight bias that goes into questioning a play calling, not to mention those guys know their personnel better than you do. They know the opposition better than you do. They know what they actually called and you don't, like when was it checked out of and all that sort of thing. So I don't do the questioning of play calling. This was more conceptual. When you understand just the raw physics of bigger, faster, stronger people that you have on your side versus them, and you see how much you're imposing your will early on and you're leaning and it's working, and then you get away from it. It's almost like this thing I've watched a lot of times in college football, more so in years past where guys come out and they've got those bright laminated play sheets and it looks so awesome. And you know, they've worked all spring and all summer and all fall leading up to game week on it and they've practiced it and repped it. And here's the problem with that. Sometimes that makes you think you have to run all of it. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you run all of it and it still doesn't work. But then other times you run a couple of things that work really well. And you know what you ought to do? Save the rest of it for next week and just stick with what works. But the problem is it makes you feel a little bit less accomplished when you do it that way. Just think about it. If you're Andy Koldenik, you're an offensive coordinator, you repped all that stuff, you worked. It feels like such a waste not to use it. And at that point, your intelligence is actually your own prison. Your football acumen, your football IQ is actually your own prison because someone who knows infinitely less about football than you in that situation would be better equipped to call the game. My sister would have been better equipped to call that particular game tonight for Penn State because it was so academic. It should have been so academic. Now, that's hyperbolic a little bit. That's dumbing it down and simplifying it a little bit too much, but you get my point. So that was the critical eye that I watched the game through. But here's the more overarching eye. Penn State just won another playoff game. So I guess I should have led with this sort of tone. Congratulations where they're due. James Franklin's got this team in the semifinals. Drew Aller is about to start at quarterback for one of only four remaining teams in the playoff. This is a huge, huge deal. So some of the mechanisms here. Ashton Jeanty got his, and that didn't really matter to me so much. If you watch the preview video, it didn't matter to me if he topped 100 yards. It mattered to me how he did it. The devil was always going to be in the details here. So in this particular game, Jeanty gets his, quote unquote, but I'm looking at the stat sheet right now 30 carries for 104 yards. That's a padlock stat. If I tell you it's going to take him 30 carries, 3.5 yards per carry to hit the 100-yard mark, Penn State's won the game unless they turn the ball over a lot or Boise scores like 21 on special teams. They're going to win the game there. And they did. And they held Boise to their lowest point output of the season. So Boise, I thought, probably had some calls go against them, but just in the aggregate of the overall flow of the game, if you're talking about like how it would have played out if you played it again, I don't care if it's a totally clean game. Like that notwithstanding, that is totally offset by the incompetence at times of Penn State's play calling. I cannot believe I'm questioning play calling. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make there is there's no world where we run this thing back and Boise wins it. There's no world where they hit their two field goals and they win the game. Like there's no not a thread in my mind that is lingering and saying, boy, Penn State won this, but I said during the game, and I really thought this before the game, but I said during the game, Penn State, what did I say? Penn State is the only team that can beat Penn State tonight. It's just common sense, guys. Some people push back on it, I think, because they wanted Boise to be able to pull the upset. It's fine if you want it. It's fine if you dream it, if you wish it. But then there's cold, hard reality that slaps you in the face. And the cold, hard reality was I was right when I said that. Penn State was going to have to greatly contribute to Boise being able to win this game tonight. Notice, I didn't say Boise was incapable of winning. But I did believe if Boise did pull off the upset, Penn State was going to have a lot to do with it. And you know what? Penn State did do Boise several favors, and it still didn't matter. So that's not to be disrespectful of Boise. I'm going to share my thoughts on how this stuff should go versus how it unfortunately does go in a second. But there was major pressure here. And if you don't believe that, try losing the game. Penn State loses this game, it is a crippling blow to James Franklin and Penn State. I know if you don't know a lot about college football, you're listening to me talk here, you're thinking, what's wrong with this dude? Like, he sounds really critical for a team that just won by 17 in a playoff game. Well, that's because I've got a pretty high standard for Penn State. I hope the people in that building feel the same way. I've got a pretty high standard. I had a high standard going into this game for them. They didn't meet it candidly, but they still won convincingly, which is probably a good sign as it relates to the future. There was major pressure though because of the format. Been a lot of talk about the playoff format. Been a lot of talk from me included about how well this set up for Penn State. And here's the thing about that. That's not Penn State's fault. And if you were to go on and win the title, no one's going to remember 10 years from now that you had a favorable draw. They're just going to remember you won the title. No one remembers the extenuating circumstances. Having said that, because of the draw, I thought it was imperative that they win these first two games at least. SMU, they blew them out. Boise, mistake prone game, and they still won it convincingly. So, two big, bright green check marks so far for James Franklin and Penn State. And I just thought because of the draw, it necessitated this. So, it's a sigh of relief on one front that you get that out of the way. Now, that's not to say that, okay, you feel free to go lose now. And if Penn State goes and gets blown out, you'll still have the same criticism you will always have had. Not from me per se, but from a lot of folks. But these were the games like in the past when people have called James Franklin overrated. I'm not going to beat this horse to death again because it's already dead and laying in the corner over there. But for those of you who don't watch the show a lot of times James Franklin is called overrated. Penn State's called overrated. And I counter, they're the most properly rated team. And James Franklin's the most properly rated coach in America because they very, very, very rarely, if ever, lose to teams that they're favored against. They've lost historically to teams they're not favored against. Your Ohio States and Michigans. And so that's not being overrated. That's being properly rated. Well, these were different instances because they were solid favorites against SMU. I don't care what SMU was ranked. I don't care what seed they were. I don't care what seed Boise was. I don't care who had a first round bye. Penn State's the much better team, and they were supposed to win this game convincingly. So if they were to lose either of these games, that would have been a really big indictment. That's out of the way. Now they'll go on to play, as I'm recording this, I don't know who it's going to be. It'll either be Georgia or Notre Dame. That game will be down in Miami. Plan on being at that game, by the way. So we'll see how that works out. But Abdul Carter, gotta check on his status. I didn't see him in a sling, so he was still on the sideline. That's a really, really big piece. I frankly am not sure they can win without him. That's one of the most important football players in America left in this bracket. But to get back to this, the format is not Penn State's fault. The format screwed up. Everyone knows that. Even Penn State fans know that. It doesn't matter. The format's not your fault. Everyone's spoken their mind on the format. But the format that I'm focused on here, more so than should only conference champs get first round buys and all that stuff. We've talked about that so much. You know, the format we haven't spoken about enough is the college football format in general. Josh, you mean the college football playoff format? No, I mean the college football format in general. Because let me tell you what we just saw. We saw a historic season from Ashton Genty come to an end tonight, and they'll remember that for a long time, and they should. We saw Spencer Danielson, I think, really pop on the national radar as maybe a future star in the coaching industry. And that is totally validated, and they'll remember this for a long time on that front as well. This team was very special for Boise State. All of these things true. And so this is how it ends. This was the best possible scenario for them. It's going to be the best possible scenario for any G5 team moving forward. So here's what's messed up in my mind. I've spoken about this dozens of times. I'm going to say it once more because it bears repeating on a night like this. The college football format right now is so dumb to me. This is not some hot take. This is not immediate aftermath of the game. I've said this for years. Any sane person would create a format that didn't pretend like 134 teams are playing the same sport. But in college football, we don't have that. And we don't have it because 134 teams are playing the same caliber of football. We have it because we need to pretend they are so that the G5 conferences can be subsidized financially by the big boys. They can maintain their umbilical cord that is attached to the college football playoff because they need it financially to survive. And you know what? That's true, and I understand that. I wish so badly that we had a G5 playoff. I wish so badly that when teams like this and players like Ashton Genty emerge at the G5 level, instead of pretending that making the big playoff is this huge payoff for them in some fantasy world, like that's supposed to be the grand accomplishment because they're never winning a national title at this level. Instead of that, I wish there was a tournament where that team right there could compete in and actually win a national title because right now we don't have that. I got painted as a bad guy the other day in the first round because I said, as Penn State was beating SMU's brains in, I said, there's not going to be a Cinderella in college football because this is not basketball. College football doesn't work this way. Now, I define Cinderella. I'm talking about teams capable of winning a national title. I'm not talking about making the playoff. I'm not talking about making the playoff and maybe pulling one upset. I mean, winning a title. That's all a playoff is about to me, is winning a title. This is not basketball. You don't celebrate making the tournament as a crowning achievement. That is not the way football should be. I hope that's never the way football is. Football should be you got a shot to win a title. You're going to win a title and you were an underdog. That's a Cinderella story. We'll never have that. There's no world, 0 out of 100 simulations of this thing would ever see Boise win this national championship. But they could win a national championship if we had a G5 playoff. We don't have that. And every time I've mentioned it, some of the G5 folks are the maddest at it as a concept. So, whatever. It doesn't affect me. If anything, I used to think that when I said that, I would get agreement from the G5 folks because I thought there would be an understanding, like an acknowledgement that, yeah, you're right. We've got fractional budgets, we've got fractional rosters, we've got fractional facilities to those guys. Why don't we create a world, an ecosystem where we compete against each other for a title? You guys have said you don't want it, and you treat it as disrespect if anyone mentions it, so I'm not going to mention it. But that is what I personally wish. Okay, so Penn State now. I was of the opinion that they were affected by the cold weather in their first round game. That offense was, and to some degree, they would reignite in this game. And there were shades of that. They never really went off like I thought they would. I still worry that there are elements here of this offense that if it looks like it did tonight, you cannot go on sustained periods of, pass pro breaking down or sustained periods of not understanding when and when not to run the ball, sustained periods of balls being put on the money, but just catches not being made. You cannot do that against Georgia, Notre Dame, etc. You can't do that the rest of the way. And when I say you can't do it, I mean you can't do it and still expect to win. So there is no margin for error anymore. Now, it could be that this Penn State team has gone as far as they can. And if that's true, then it is not a bad year at all. It's a really good year. They played for a Big Ten title. They won 2 games in the playoff. So if that is it, then okay, I'm totally fine with this year. I'm still a believer that there is another level up that this team can perform at. And if they hit that level, they can win the next game they play. They can do that. I'm telling you, they can do that. It is going to take leveling up. So it's going to take playing their best game in what will be their biggest game of the season. And we will now wait with bated breath on Wednesday, New Year's Day, to see who it is they're going to play. But congratulations to James Franklin. Congratulations to Penn State. I criticize because I care. I was really invested in this one because had Boise State won this, I would have looked foolish and I would have been drug on the internet. And that's not how we want to start 2025. So you guys are going to the Orange Bowl. It is going to be a lot more tolerable in Miami in early January than it will be in State College. Make that trip if you guys can. I am telling you, I know it's out of some of your budget range. I'm blessed enough to get to go as a job. So I know, but in the past, I've had to pay to go to the games too. I'm just telling you, 10 years from now, if it costs you $1,200 to go, you probably won't miss the 1,200 as much as you'll value the memory. You're buying a memory. So if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. But if you can afford it, if you can work it, I strongly encourage you guys, go to that game. Take your son, take your wife, take your girlfriend, take your daughter, go to that game, and you'll be glad you did. I will see you guys down there. Until then, take care and God bless.